Connection before content is great for building trust, but you may be doing icebreakers wrong. In this video, I'm going to share 3 examples, one from business, one from education, and one from a nonprofit context, where I have seen people lead connection before content that works really well. For the duration of this video, I am going to bleep out the word because for me, I'm on a gentle mission to quietly eradicate the word and replace it with connection before content. Because unlike an connection before content, for me, connects to the purpose of why you're actually there. And so when you have people that tend to get hives when they hear the word, you can offset those hives and create a lot more buy-in if what you're doing is purposeful. One of my least favorite phrases to hear, it's like nails on a chalkboard, is hearing somebody say, "Hey everybody, before we get started, we're going to do..." The nails on the chalkboard part wasn't the word. It was actually the before this meeting gets started. For me, connection before content isn't like the before the meeting thing. It is an essential part of the meeting that actually makes the meeting more productive, that on the whole, when you weave in a culture of connection before content, it can actually reduce the amount of time that you spend in meetings on a week-to-week basis. And there's a decade worth of educational psychology research that would point to the fact that when we are connected and related to each other, it creates all sorts of communication shortcuts. And it builds this relationship of trust and this bridge that we can walk really easily across so that we don't have to dance around each other doing work. We can speak directly, we can share honest feedback. All this really good stuff happens. The problem is you can't build that relationship of trust just like in a one-day offsite or just by doing 45 icebreakers in a day. The way you can build it and increase that psychological safety is by weaving connection before content through the fabric of your organization, your meeting structure, your cadence, your norms, your systems that you already have in place. It doesn't need to take a long time. The methods that I'll share are applicable in both a virtual and in-person context, and they can take anywhere from 30 seconds to 15 minutes, and they work really well to connect people to the purpose of why they're there, to connect people to each other, and to create at least the choice or option for authenticity and vulnerability. In other words, when people show up, can they tell the truth? I think a really good question, or a really powerful question, is one that just simply gives people the opportunity to tell the truth. For example, in a business context, I was working with State Farm Insurance. You might have heard of them. And I was working with 200 of their senior leaders. So these are busy people. They've got a lot to do. And the idea of an icebreaker is definitely going to cue hives. And so what I did for this group is we were getting together, and part of the intention or purpose of gathering was to share best practices across the organization, right? So they all worked in different areas, literally different regions, but also different parts and areas of the business. Part of the intent was to share best leadership practices, et cetera. And so I facilitated this connection before content that I called Goldmine of Goodness. And the idea was, it was in a virtual workshop. And what I had people do is this collaborative journaling exercise, where instead of using the chat like we typically do for little sips and bites of connection, or in person if we're sharing out little sips and bites of content, I had people for 2 solid minutes type their response to this prompt. And specifically I framed it and said, please type out for 2 minutes, type out a response that if somebody else read it, it would just be this goldmine of goodness. It would just be this nugget, this wisdom that they could take and steal and apply into their own context. The prompt is, what is an example of a best practice that has made your team, organization, customer experience 10 times better over the last 6 months? Specifically wanted to say 10 times, so it was pushing the boundaries or the limits a little bit, getting people to reach. And then for 2 minutes, I played some music and people journaled on this question. And they didn't hit enter until I said 3, 2, 1, hit enter. And then all of a sudden, 200 golden nuggets in little paragraph form showed up. And so I queued up another 3-minute timer for the group to then go through and read everybody else's responses. Do you realize that I would say that we created a moment of connection before content here, but it was so valuable to the group that people who would typically get hives when they hear the word perked right up because they're like, hey, there's 200 potentially awesome ideas that could make my life better. I'm gonna engage in this right now. Following that, to really embed that idea and that learning and get a little bit more human connection, we split people up into breakouts to reshare one of the ideas that really stuck out to them in the chat in small groups. That entire process took about 15 minutes, maybe less, after I debriefed it at the end. And granted, this was a main part of our purpose, so I wouldn't always make connection before content take that long in a meeting. But for this case, it was so tied to the purpose, it was so valuable, that we probably could have made the entire session focused around it, and it would have been useful for the group. Second one, in an education context. I learned this originally from Mark Collard, who's the creator of Playmio.com, which is this crazy giant database of collaborative learning exercises. We partnered with Mark for this connection toolkit that I've created, which is intended to amplify connection, belonging, and trust. And it's got a whole bunch of group exercises, great for groups of different sizes. It also comes along with a free forever subscription to Playmio, which is worth more than the kit itself. So one of the activities in there is called alphabet equations. So I heard of a math teacher who went on to Playmio after she got the connection toolkit. What alphabet equations are is something like L of the A equals 26. So spend 3 seconds trying to figure this out. Solve this equation. L of the A equals 26. There are 26 letters of the alphabet, right? So there's, on Playmio, there's a whole list of a whole bunch of different alphabet equations. And so this math teacher led was printing out a bunch of those, having them up on the wall, and challenging the group to work together in small groups to move the equations over from unsolved to solved on the whiteboard. And so there's all this interaction, all this connection happening. It was breaking the ice. We don't have to bleep that one out. It was breaking the ice, but it was also creating some connection before content, warming people's brains up. And it was also related to and tied to the purpose that they were there, which was math class, right? Well, that's not a really good purpose, but to learn math. Third example from a nonprofit that I actually used to work with called World in Conversation. And what World in Conversation would do, and my job was to sit in a room of 8 to 12 strangers and facilitate for 90 minutes dialogues on really soft, fluffy topics like long-term conflict, race relations, politics, gender, sexuality, religion, etc. for 90 minutes with the sole purpose of understanding the other, skipping headlines and really understanding the other. You can imagine, because people were mandated to be there, they came in a little bit arms crossed. And so the icebreaker that we would use to create some connection before content was very simply paying attention. We trained facilitators to pay attention to what people were wearing, carrying, sharing, or presenting, and ask a question rooted in your own natural curiosity. So if I walked into the room and I was wearing this, or a student walked into the room and was wearing this, I might ask them, oh, what's the story behind this ring? What's the story behind this necklace? What is this band? I've never heard them play, right? And the idea there is that when you meet with people, virtually or in person, they've already started the conversation without saying a word, because they knew they were going to go out in public, and they chose to put things on their body that represented a part of who they were. And so you have all of these doorways and pathways into who people are in a very safe way, because they've chosen to display it. Now notice I didn't say follow your curiosity based on the size of somebody's nose, or the texture of their hair, or the color of their skin, right? Something that they chose, something that they're wearing, carrying, sharing, because some people come in chatty, or actually presenting. And the presenting piece is like if somebody comes in and they sit down like this, right? Or they come in and they're like really bubbly. I might say to them as they walk into the room to build a relationship of trust, hey, it seems like you're in a particularly good mood. What's got you in such a good mood? Do you see how that's non-threatening, because I'm just observing something that's real in the environment? I'm not pulling some topic out of thin air, like, hey, did you see the game last night? Or like, wow, it's raining outside. These do not build trust. When you focus on who somebody is, and you allow and you create the option or choice for them to be authentic, to tell a piece of their truth, that creates trust, that creates connection before content. If you liked this video, go ahead and do that. And you would also absolutely love some of the tools they've created. So these We Connect cards, deck of questions intended to create conversations that matter. This other card deck called We Engage cards with quotes on one side and pictures, all sorts of really cool group exercises. I created them very specifically with one mission in mind, which was to make an icebreaker that didn't suck. I'm Chad Littlefield. Have an awesome day.